Okay, great. Thank you, Stein, for inviting me, and thank you all for coming. This is as you say, this is an important topic, especially these days, where a lot of our face-to-face teaching is being limited. And it's hard when you're asked to give a talk like this of what to include and what not to include. And so I'm going to do my best to try to hit the high spots and then save some time for questions at the end. I gave a talk to the Geophysical Institute about 6 months ago, and I um, tried to not say a lot of the same things that I said then, but I want to hit a couple of those notes just because I don't know how many people heard that, and I think they're important points. So um, first thing when we think about blended learning is we have to think about what is different about that than traditional courses. And in a traditional face-to-face course, there's a lot of concern about covering the material, and we lecture so that we can fulfill our responsibility to cover the material. But I contend that when we teach like that, we tend to encourage students to memorize, sort of push everything toward the bottom end of Bloom's taxonomy, toward the knowledge and comprehension levels. And then we ask them to tell us everything they learned in the course on the exam. We also encourage them to learn by rote memorization. And so what we want to do is think about how can we do things differently? How can we get students to push upward in that Bloom's taxonomy or any other taxonomy that we want to use for that for higher order thinking skills? And when we talk about blended learning, we're talking about online learning. And a big industry grew up, 20 years or so ago, around the world, but especially probably in the US, around instructional design. And there's a guy, Robert Gagne, who was at Florida State University, who's kind of the guru, the godfather of instructional design. And he had what is basically the 10 commandments of instructional design, Gagne's 9 events of instruction. And he says that all of these things have to be present for learning to take place. And you can disagree about whether all of them have to be there or not, but I think it's sort of a good list. First, you need to get the learner's attention. Next, you have to let them know what they're going to learn. Next, you have to connect what they're about to learn with what they've already learned. And then you present the new material. And then you give them an opportunity to practice. You give them an opportunity to give a performance, like a formative assessment. You give them feedback on that performance. Then you give an assessment, and then you do something to help them carry what they've learned on into the world or to the next lesson or something else so that they can actually remember what they've done. And in most university courses throughout the world, people do 2 of those things. They present the material in a lecture, and then they get the students to give it back on an exam. And we leave out a lot of that other connective tissue that is very important to support the learning process. So what is blended learning? Essentially, blended learning is the mixing of face-to-face teaching and online teaching. And that's a big, broad term, and it can mean almost anything. But if it's good, it has to be very thoughtful and intentional. There has to be strong connections between what happens online and what happens in the classroom. It's not really where you just do everything you always did, but you put your slides in UPED. That's not really blended learning. It has to be something fundamentally different. And so the typical model of blended learning is the flipped classroom. The flipped classroom started when a math teacher was standing up in the class, writing problems on the board, talking and noticing the students weren't understanding what he was talking about. And then he realized that their students would go home and do the homework, and when they were doing their homework, they wouldn't have any help. And wouldn't it make sense if this stuff where I'm just talking and writing, could I do that online so that they could watch that on their own time? And then we're in the class, can I be there helping them? And can I have teaching assistants and each other, students helping each other? That's where the flipped model kind of came about. And so and that's the most common form of blended learning that's going to happen at UPED and most other places, is where you think about the lectures where a professor is doing most of their talking. They could record that, and the students could access that anytime. And saving the sacred time you have in face-to-face classroom to interaction, so that it's not just you talking, it's you and the discussions having, or you and the students having a discussion or doing group work or whatever, so that it's more interactive and active learning. And so in the flipped or blended model, students can work at their own pace through the material. When you lecture in a classroom, once you say it, it's gone. It never happens again in the same way. And the student was thinking about the sentence you said before, they will never hear that important sentence you just said, and there's no way for them to get that back. And so you can, if that's recorded, then they can watch it as many times as they want to. And then when they come to the classroom, they can do something where they build on that. And so a blended learning course, a well-designed blended learning course, combines the best of online and face-to-face modalities. It actually moves a lot of the agency from the professor to the student. I think that's important. And it also sort of expands the time available for learning. Of course, there are challenges with blended learning. You have to redesign what happens both online and in the classroom. You have to make those connections I was talking about between what happens in the class and outside of class. A lot of times in poorly designed blended courses, what happens in the learning management system seems like it's just busy work or it's just add-on, it's not essential. So you want to sort of create this where what happens outside of class in a planned, structured way leads into what's going to happen in the class. So if students don't do what they're supposed to do online, they're not going to be able to fully participate in the class. And then what they do in the class then carries into what they're supposed to do online, so that you have this very connected plan for their progression through the course. It means taking advantage of asynchronous learning, so that it's not in the same time, not in the same place. The students can work on their own time, but there's a range of time that they have to do that. You have to be willing to mess up. You have to be willing to be human. That's another just fundamental aspect of online learning, that when you have a fully face-to-face class, people come every Tuesday or every Tuesday and Thursday. They know they're supposed to be there. It's a routine they get into. They know where to sit. They know what to do. When you bring them into an online environment, you lose all of that structure. So they don't really have a time they have to be there necessarily. They don't know what to do when they get there. So you have to plan this stuff out. And so the more human you can make yourself, and the more human you can get the students to make themselves, the more they will feel connected to that online community and will come back. And so being willing to try something, and if it doesn't work, just say, oh, that didn't work, I had better plans, let me try something else. That actually makes students feel more connected to you rather than thinking that you messed up. And also, when you try something new, ask students for feedback so that you can make changes, so that you can know what to do better. And so really what blended learning does is it basically gives a clearer structure to how students work through the material. And it provides opportunities for reflection and interaction that usually don't happen in a traditional course. Okay, so blended learning requires technology. So where does technology fit into this? And just like lectures, technologies are mediating tools. They offer affordances, which can be good or bad. There's nothing inherently good about any particular technology. It's how you use that technology that makes it good or bad. And so there are things we need to think about in terms of that. You also need to think, when you use a technology, you have to take a little bit of time to train the students on how to interact and encounter that technology, because it doesn't just work like they think it's going to. And we think of our students, at least the traditional age students, as digital natives and much more savvy than we are with technology. but I'm not convinced that's true. I think they're much better with digital toys than they are with digital tools, and we need to make sure that we provide support for them in learning how to use these different things that we're doing. And in a blended course at UPED, these are the main things that we will need: a learning management system, at UPED, a video system, probably Kaltura. If you want to make your own videos outside of Kaltura, you would still probably use Kaltura to deliver those videos to students. Video conferencing, which is Zoom, which we're using now, is for live interactive time, the synchronous time of a blended course if you're not meeting face-to-face. But I've also decided that I sort of prefer using Zoom to record video lectures. Then I think it does a better job than Kaltura. I record the video in Zoom, I edited it a little bit, and then I upload it into Kaltura to deliver it to students. I think that's a good way to do that. For interaction with students, you can use announcements, you can use discussions, you can use quizzes. Because you can design a quiz so that when they take the quiz, they get immediate feedback on their answers, whether they're right or wrong, what's right about it, what's wrong about it, and that's a form of interaction that is very important in the learning process. And then formative assessment, quizzes are obviously formative assessment as well as interaction, and the assignments tool is also good for that. And we'll talk about some of these as we go, but we don't have time to talk about all of them in depth. So with UPED, the main function of an LMS or of Canvas is, one is to deliver content. Another is, echoing Gagne, is to elicit performance, and for you to provide feedback on that performance. It gives you tools for communicating and interacting. It lets you do sort of administrative things that you need to do, like putting things in the calendar and that sort of thing. And it also lets you set expectations, and the outcomes tool is great for that. That's beyond the scope of this talk, but there are some really cool ways to use outcomes. And these are the main tools that are available in Canvas. How many of you use these? Or how many of these on this list of, 16 different tools, how many of those do you use in a typical course? Anybody want to just say out loud or put in the chat? 7, that's pretty good. Thank you, Denise. 8, even better. There are all of these are valuable. Okay, 10, great. 9, 6, 7, 6. That's really good. I guess you're probably all using different ones. But I think modules is an important tool. Pages obviously is an important tool. When we first got Canvas, they were saying that we moved from MECIA to Canvas because Canvas is a pedagogical teaching tool and MECIA is an administrative tool. And it's interesting that, as a file system, MECIA was probably better than Canvas. If it's just a place to upload files for students and you just use the files tool, that's probably a step backward than what we had in MECIA. But if you use modules to structure when you give files and to give proper titles for files and things like that, that presents the files in a coherent way that students know which file to use when. SpeedGrader is a great tool for giving feedback on assignments. It would be better if we had the full version of Canvas, but that's a different discussion. Quizzes are easy to use and a very good tool. And we know about, I think now, Kaltura and Zoom and those other things. So I'm not going to spend too much time here. Another thing about blended learning that is important, I think, is that we just assume that video will be a part of that. And so and a lot of that is moving our lectures into video. And some of the basic information about that we learn from research about video, and I keep looking for better and better research, and I have my doubts about all of it, but I think there's some general trends in the research that we can follow. And some of the best methodologically done research I've seen on this says that we can count on about 6 minutes of student attention and engagement in a video. And that can vary according to the quality of video, the nature of the video, the subject of the video. But I don't think we want to push it much past 10 minutes. And I could spend the whole 45 minutes that I have talking about how to rethink your lectures and all of that, because some of us, if we've got 2 by 45-minute lectures and we want to put every word that we would say in that 90 minutes into 6-minute videos, then that's 15 videos or whatever, and we don't want to have 15 6-minute videos. So how do we think about what do I need to say and what can I leave for other people to say and for the students to develop on their own? I think it's also important that to not try to be too fancy, that if it becomes too professional and slick, then it feels like a commercial and not like an academic production. But it's also, I think, back to that human thing I was talking about earlier, that if you seem like I'm your teacher talking to you from my living room or from my office or from whatever, it's more engaging than it would be if you had some hotshot in a fancy studio. It feels like it's, an important thing in a video like this is that the student out there in cyberspace has to feel like you're talking to her. A lot of people feel like they give a better performance if they're in a lecture hall giving a lecture and they want to record their lecture while they're giving it to this live audience, because they're more animated and they get feedback in it and it feels more natural, and that is better for you. But the student watching a recording of an auditorium wasn't in that auditorium and will never feel like they were in that auditorium, and there's always this sort of level of alienation there that they never can quite get over. So it's better to look the camera in the eye and make that person feel that you're looking him or her in the eye. So think about in your 2 by 45-minute lecture that you would typically give, how much of that can only come from your mouth, or can it only best come from you saying it out loud? Think about what those moments are. Lectures, there's a lot of research on lectures and I don't want to really get into that about how effective they are, and there are some disagreements there, but lectures are much better for motivating students, contextualizing information, making students want to learn, than they are at delivering information. If there are things that your students just need to know, there are probably better ways to give them that information than you saying it out loud. So think about strategically, what are the things that I need to say out loud? What are the things I need to put into a textual format that are easy to learn and memorize? And what are the things that I can actually ask the students to do so that they can construct that knowledge and information on their own? And so just a couple of quick words about video. When you're thinking about your video screen, think about how the screen is divided, divided into thirds vertically and horizontally. And the eye should always be in the top third. Whether they're in the middle or not, that's a different topic. It doesn't matter that much. But if they're not in the middle, make sure that there is more room in front of your face than behind your face. Notice how this guy's shoulders are turned. And so that pink area is conceptually in front of him. And if he were in the middle of the screen looking that way, there would actually be more room behind him than there is in front of him. And that looks goofy. Another thing to think about is when you are recording it with your laptop. I'm doing this on purpose. I actually closed the window because there was too much light coming in, or closed my curtain. But if I were doing a Zoom session that's live, I'm not going to worry about it that much. But if I'm going to record that for a video lecture, I have this stack of books on my desk, and I pick up my laptop like this. I set my laptop up like this so that now I'm framed a lot closer and I can look at it this way. I've got an extra light that I turn on to improve the light, and I play with it a lot more than I'm gonna do with it now. But just paying attention to very simple production values is really important. And I'm gonna put that back because it's easier to look at my screen this way. And just holding your hand out like this and spinning around and finding the best relationship to the light, because the light in this room is primarily behind my head. And so I can move my seat around, I can turn like this, I can find where the light is best on my hand, and I can put my face where my hand is, and I know that's the best lighting in the room. And also putting a microphone on. If you're recording a lecture, get a little lapel microphone for 250 kroner and put it on, and it clears out all the room noise, the dogs barking down the hall, all those kind of things makes a huge difference. If you're going to use your phone, use a tripod. This light that I just turned on actually has this tripod I have it on is for my phone. I bought that to just stick my phone in it so I can set it on the same pile of books I have here, and that takes a much better picture. I've seen people sitting in a spinny chair like this with a selfie. They're shooting a selfie video spinning around like that, and their audience is nauseated by the time the film is over. So just pay attention to very simple values. It makes a huge difference, because you don't need professional production values for a video like this, but bad production values distract students from learning. So if there's bad audio, or if there's moving, shaking video, they're not thinking about what you're saying. They're thinking about how you could have done that audio better. And you don't want them thinking about things like that. Okay, so how do we know if we're doing it right? And I'd like to spend more time on this than I'm going to, but think about what has been happening in your course in the past. How do your students learn? And how are they demonstrating to you that they have learned? How do they get used to what's going on and what your expectations are? And then you have to think about that when you move it online. And there's also a tendency, especially when we do it quickly, is we favor the synchronous time over the asynchronous time, whether it's in the face-to-face classroom or whether it's in Zoom. Zoom is like what we used to do, so we want to favor that. But we need to give more credit to the asynchronous part, the things that they do in UPED, the discussions, the assignments, the content delivery that happens there. And so experiment, try things. If they don't work, try again. And evaluate constantly. Come up with ways to evaluate whether what you're doing is working or not. Continually ask students, how is this going? Continually. Another way we can know if it's quality or not, there's this QLT rubric that was developed at California State University. And it has 10 primary elements to it. And I'm going to go through those quickly. The first thing, I mentioned this briefly earlier, but when people go into a traditional classroom, they know how to sit down. They know how to turn in a paper. They know where the instruction is going to come from. But when they go into an online course or an online part of a course, everybody does that differently. Even though they're used to Canvas because all their courses in Canvas, they're not used to your course in Canvas. And we design things in a way that is intuitive to us. And we normalize that, and we assume that makes it intuitive to them, but that's not really true. So you have to give them instructions and lead them through. And if you're not having a lot of face-to-face time, you need to introduce yourself and get your students to introduce themselves as well. Provide very clear expectations. Explain what technologies they need to have and to be able to use. So don't be afraid to repeat yourself a lot. Give instructions in multiple places. Don't just say it's in the plan or something like that. You need to tell them when they're supposed to do something. Tell them how to do it until they've done it enough times that you feel like it's not necessary. If you have an online discussion, don't just say participate in this discussion or just ask the question. Tell them what kind of response you want them to give, how many responses you want them to give to other students, how much should they write, what kind of things should they say, that sort of thing. How do you assess the learning? Make sure the learning outcomes are clear and well developed, and have outcomes for every module I recommend, and make sure those are consistent with the course outcomes. When you assess those outcomes, make sure that there's constructive alignment through that. Make sure they understand what counts as a grade and what doesn't count as a grade, how that grade is determined. Make sure you have multiple opportunities for feedback. Let them be able to keep track of where they are and how they're doing. This verb wheel, Bloom verb wheel, I think is a great tool. I mean, it's not perfect, but if you see the little purple circle there, those are the 6 levels of Bloom. And then the orange or yellow middle circle, those are verbs that you could use in your learning outcome statements that touch that, that get at that level of Bloom. And then the green level around that are activities you could have them do to demonstrate that they've achieved that learning outcome. And there are hundreds of these things out there. This is one of the better ones in my opinion, but you can dicker on whether a verb in one of those sections could go in another section, and it's not really all that important which one it is, but you just want to think between really the top half of the circle and the bottom half of the circle is the main distinction in my mind. And so when you think about assessment, and mostly formative assessment in a blended course, it needs to be progressive. When you have students doing things online, they need to have formative, continual things that they're doing. Doesn't have to count in the grade necessarily, but for the blended thing to work, they have to have deliverables that happen throughout the course. And those deliverables needed to be low stakes for the most part. They can be just pass, fail. They can just be for certifying you for the exam, but it needs to be something to keep them engaged through the semester, and not where they just do their cramming at the end for the exam. UPED needs to enable these things. There need to be lots of different kinds of things. Don't just pick one little pony and use that over and over and over. Vary the things that you do, and try to give as much feedback as possible. And you can automate a lot of that feedback using the tools in Canvas. It's not that you have to spend hours and hours every week giving feedback. And when you're in the classroom, you can use classroom assessment techniques. And things like 1-minute papers, even active learning things like think, pair, share kind of counts as this. But where you just periodically will at the end of class say, what was the most important thing you learned today? Or what was something that you didn't understand today? And they write that out on a sheet of paper and turn it in as they leave. And then you get a sense of where they are and what's going on. Using a student response system like Clickers or Poll Everywhere or Kahoot, that's another thing like this. The third item in this is instructional content. What are the materials that are there, and are they properly cited, and are they clear? Is the purpose of them clear? Do they actually contribute to the intended learning outcomes? The fourth one is interaction and community. The number one determinant of success in an online course is the amount of interaction in the course, and interaction between you and the student. It can be between students, and I think the most important one is between the students and content. How can we get our students interacting with the content? And interaction implies that both sides are changed. If one agent acts on another object, then that object is affected. If interaction, both sides are affected. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. Number 5 is facilitation and instruction. That's where you present the course concepts. It's where you facilitate that interaction. It's where you decide what students need to do. In the Biggs model, it's not about what the teacher does, it's about what the student does. But what the student does should be shaped, and to some extent, not completely, but to some extent, guided or directed by the instructor. And so that's how you facilitate that is important, and how you provide feedback. And so that brings us to Zoom, which is, one of the things about Zoom, although I'm giving a bad example because I only have 45 minutes, you have a whole semester in your blended course, is don't just try to do your normal lecture in Zoom. Zoom is mostly an interactive tool, and we're going to get to that in just a minute, where you're going to ask questions and I'm going to respond to that, and you're going to respond to each other. And that's really where Zoom is a powerful tool. In some ways I could have recorded a lot of what I've done so far and put that in Kaltura, and you could have watched it. Whether you would have watched it or not, it's a different story, but that's a different issue. So like I said, have them do something before Zoom, have them do something after Zoom. When they're participating online, it's usually a good idea to develop participation guidelines. I've not heard any stories of it here, but you remember when the pandemic first started, there were all sorts of horror stories about Zoom bombing, where students would come into Zoom meetings and put up pornographic or racist materials. And you don't want people responding to a discussion post saying you're an idiot. You need to have sort of set guidelines for respectful interactions. Need to make sure everybody has the bandwidth available to do Zoom, or you can't really count on them to learn the way that they're supposed to learn. And try to develop things that happen in your live sessions that are interactive, whether it's breakout room discussions or clicker questions or anything like that. Another thing is to have rubrics. This one is just an example of one you might use for a discussion, so that students can know what's expected of them, and whoever's doing the evaluation, whether it's you or an external censor or a teaching assistant, they will know how to evaluate the work that is submitted. Another thing is use the tools because they're appropriate, not because they're there. Don't use Zoom just because we have Zoom. Use Zoom because you have a pedagogical problem that Zoom can solve. Use discussions because it's serving a need that you have. Don't just use it because it's there. When when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. Don't just use it because it's there. And when you use it, make sure you let the students know, as I said, how to use it and how they're expected to use it. Another thing that's important is providing support for students. Let them know in the course where they can get technical support, learning support. If the course is mostly online, where they can get other campus services that they might not have access to. If it turns out, which hopefully it won't, that students are away from campus for part of the fall, like they were for part of the spring, then letting them know where they can get counseling support and then other student services support. We should make that available in our course, or we should point them to the resources on the university website that they need. And then let them know what you're going to do for support. How are you going to respond to their questions? How are you going to respond to their emails? Early on in online learning, students would rate the quality of the course based on how quickly a professor would answer their emails. if they sent an email at 4 o'clock in the morning and the student and the professor didn't answer within 30 minutes, they would go complaining to the department leader. So state early how you're going to respond to their requests and needs. Try to pay attention to accessibility and universal design for learning. Only recently has it become sort of codified that when you make a video, it should be closed captioned. It should have subtitles so that people can't hear. If people have hearing impairments, they can still learn from that video. And it's just best practice. If you can use universal design that's accessible to everybody, that's not just good for students with disabilities, it's good for everybody. The final important one, I think, is course summary. It's remember that Gagne's 9th thing is to enhance retention and transfer. When the course is over, provide them an opportunity to take what they've learned and carry it with them and not just forget it when they've spilled it out on the exam. Give them opportunities for reflection on their learning and their goals and their future goals. And the 10th one, which I'm not as worried about yet, are your course materials designed in a way that will work well on a mobile phone? And I guess that is important because students will probably do most of their UPED work on their phone. And are the materials that you provide there accessible on a phone? And if they are not, can you make that known that they will need to do this bit on their laptop because it won't fit on the phone? And a big example of that is in HTML. If you're using the rich text editor and UPED, if you use tables, a lot of times those won't work well on a phone. And so being mindful of that is a nice touch, but that's not as important as some of the other things that we've talked about. Practical examples. It's really hard to give practical examples because one, online courses don't look the way that they are experienced. When you show somebody's assignment, it's hard to really make that look flashy. The way the assignment is great when you do it as a student. It doesn't look that great on the screen. And so I'm going to sort of try to talk about those in the question and answer part. And so the end, this is where I'll stop, is blended learning is not about covering the material. It's about opening up the material so that the students can explore it themselves, develop themselves, and construct their own understandings and new understandings from that. So I'm going to stop there.